This is KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and Tim Hankiewicz from Orchestra Iowa is back. Normally, we are here talking solely about your classical or pop series, but today we get to talk about something that is of great import to both of us.
Well, absolutely.
And every musical savvy audience member, whether their thing is jazz, whether it's classical, whether it's pop. Branford Marsalis is a name that is known to everyone.
Oh, my God. I got to tell you, I am so excited about this. This program that we're doing this weekend, it's been 5 years in the making. And I don't know quite where to start because there are so many threads that are coming together for this particular program, both strategically, philosophically, as well as musically. And not to mention the fact that Branford Marsalis is one of my all-time idols. Every time, I'm usually not for a lack of words, but I have to tell you a secret that when I am in front of people, an icon that I admire, I get tongue-tied and I'm just like a teenager trying to ask a girl out on a date. I quickly become quite an idiot. And I can't tell you how excited I am about this weekend.
Yeah, well, there are some of us who would say it's not that big of a journey. I'm kidding, of course. I'm kidding. Well, then, let's start there.
Okay.
You said that Branford is one of your all-time idols.
Right.
When did you first become aware of him? And as a classically trained pianist, what was it about this legendary jazz saxophonist that turned you on?
Well, I'm also a television junkie. Grew up in the age when Johnny Carson was giving up the Tonight Show to Jay Leno, and so I first of all, I obviously I knew about his brother Wynton because I was a recovering trumpet player as well, and then I first heard his brother Branford as leader of the Tonight Show band, and I became a huge fan instantly overnight, and in many ways, I think his career has been much more varied and interesting journey than his brother's.
Of all the Marsalises, he's the one who has had his fingers in lots of different things.
Right, and they're both, what I find so admirable, I would like to know the family dynamic behind their growing up, because they both have excelled in the jazz and classical world, and that is not an easy feat to do.
Well, and probably more so as a saxophonist, because saxophone is not always usually a classical instrument.
When you see saxophone in the orchestra, we usually have to tip off our security guard and make sure that he lets them through the door. You're absolutely right. The saxophone is not naturally or more readily a symphonic instrument. But in this case, to have Branford not only show off his jazz chops, but also his classical acumen on a piece that he himself has been championing. For example, he's doing a saxophone concerto by Sally Beamish, a Scottish composer who's really starting to hit it big in our circles. I think her piano concerto was just premiered in Minnesota in the recent past, but she's becoming a real big deal, and he has his finger on the pulse of what's happening musically, and that's what makes him such a rare genius.
Now, on the jazz side, he's also championed the idea of continuing to promote jazz as popular music for the people, for the masses, whereas a lot of jazz has moved more into the academia circles. It's a lot of the musicians are also teachers, are associated with a college, so
I think there's always a danger, especially in the classical field, of music becoming a museum piece rather as something living and breathing and to be enjoyed. And you don't have to necessarily be a sophisticate to really understand the impact of that kind of music. What I love about jazz, that most classical musicians really admire and a skill that they wish they had, is you cook it up on the spot. It's the art of improvisation, whereas generally speaking, the art of classical music playing is the art of reading, of seeing something on the page and interpreting it from that. And so it's two different angles towards the same goal, which is to actually just enjoy the music that's being performed.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Can't wait.
Talking with Tim Hankiewicz about Branford Marsalis in Iowa. First off, we should mention here we are talking about Branford.
Right.
He's going to be coming in a little later on today, and Hollis is going to be talking with him on KCCK. So we're really looking forward to that. So if he's listening on his way here, he's probably shaking his head, going, "Oh, these two rude. I'm going to have to go in and
undo the damage,
undo all the damage these two rubes have done about me and my music." But let's talk a little bit about the program.
Right.
Because it is going to be both a classical and, classical/jazz program. So for those who haven't, Branford has been in Iowa a few times, did a Hancher show some years ago, which was more, his straight ahead jazz thing. But this is, he's appearing with the orchestra. So that means it's you mentioned the Sally Beamish piece, but talk just a little bit about the differences in jazz, classical jazz saxophone, as opposed to what people would see if they were just going to see a combo.
Okay, so this as much by design as by accident, a lot of the music that we're playing this season has a lot to do about the cross currents of American culture and music. When we started our Bruce Moore program, it was a rather fun tip to the hat to our cowboy folk tradition. Our previous concert last month, which featured our concertmaster, was about the emerging nationalism and the sort of neo-romanticism of American classical tradition. But the fact that's so remarkable about this country is that there's so many cross currents of musical influence. And one of the most powerful generating creative forces in the 20th century, of course, was jazz. And that found its way into classical music. Now, this particular program starts with Duke Ellington's Three Black Kings. And this was the Duke's foray into classical composition, where I think it might have been his first or second attempt at writing for symphony orchestra. And it was a commission intended for the Alvin Ailey Ballet Company. And so this is where an example of a great icon of jazz bridging that chasm between jazz and classical. And I have a particular surprise in store for this work that I can't share with you.
Can't talk about, but it's going to be.
But it's going to be awesome.
I know, and it's going to be so cool. That's all we can say.
But all I can say is it bridges that gap between, as I spoke earlier, of the written page and the improvisational tradition of the two styles of music. And then we get into Branford's appearance with the orchestra, a sort of straight ahead concerto, as we discussed, a Scottish composer that he has been really championing. It's called Under the Wings of a Rock, and it's basically a musical journey based on a poem about an English soldier who's commanded to kill a young woman with her baby who's taken shelter underneath the wing of a rock, and because there's of the particular conflict that's happening in the country. And of course, as this young soldier is attempting to do his duty, he just can't bring himself to do it, and walks away. And so the piece begins as much as piece ends as much as it begins. So this is a really sort of serious classical work, if you will, for saxophone and orchestra. And then we end the first half with music by John Williams. And it's a saxophone concerto that had its origins in the film Escapades. A very sort of Mad Men 1960s style of jazz that is absolutely fantastic. And I think John Williams gets short shrift because we just think of him as, he's just...
As a popular composer.
He's just a popular composer.
As if popular is bad.
As if it's bad, and there's a reason he's the most sought after and arguably the greatest film composer of all time. And this piece includes a trio of soloists. The saxophonist, Branford, and he'll be joined by Michael Geary on vibraphones and our principal bass up there as well. So it's actually for jazz combo and orchestra.
Cool.
So that's
Very
really
cool.
neat. And then we get to the last piece, which is Copland's Third Symphony. Now, you would say, well, what does Copland and jazz have to do with each other? Well, in the early 20th century, the rhythmic aspects of jazz really permeate
everything.
Everything.
So, even a composer like Copeland, who's more associated with American folk music.
But his wheelhouse is syncopation, which finds its origins in jazz. And so the rhythmic complexity, the harmonic complexity of these pieces directly have its roots in jazz, even though when it was written in the aftermath of World War II. And it's a very optimistic work, but at the same time, it takes time to mourn for the loss and the destruction of the previous 5 years, and then it turns its gaze to the future, and it has a very sort of fresh air, fresh breath, sort of optimistic look at the future. And so all these pieces have this cross current of jazz going through it, and I think it's going to be a really spectacular concert.
Talking with Tim Hankwich about this weekend's concerts featuring Branford Marsalis. Now we're at each end of the corridor.
Right.
Tomorrow, Friday, is Hancher
Auditorium. So I said earlier that there's a strategic as well as a philosophical thread that brings this program together. The strategic point of this is that we made this programming decision 5 years ago to coincide with the opening of Hancher Auditorium. One of the objectives that I have for Orchestra Iowa, we've been performing throughout Iowa, but really the core relationship is between Cedar Rapids, Iowa City. And this is also part of our audience building initiatives south of the corridor. And to be able to perform at Hancher, one of my goals is for us to play in that auditorium on a fairly regular basis. But to do so, we also have to generate the following to actually fill that hall.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Got to cover our costs.
Got to cover the costs, and also make it worth Hancher's while as well. And so I'm hoping that a person of Branford stature can attract a great audience there, and people can call Orchestra Iowa for tickets. This is somewhat confusing because you would think that because it's at Hancher, it would be through Hancher's box office. If you call the Hancher box office, they will refer you to Orchestra Iowa, or you can just call us direct.
But you guys are handling the ticketing for both concerts.
Handling the ticketing for both concerts. Yeah.
So Friday at Hancher, Saturday at the Paramount Theater. 7:30, both.
Yep.
Both shows.
Both times.
And then we should also mention that on Saturday morning, there will be a conversation with Branford that people can come and watch and listen to and ask questions, Q&A. I'm going to moderate that in the Opus Concert Cafe.
Wonderful.
Don't know how long we'll go, but I anticipate that Branford, fresh off a fun performance at Hancher, will be relaxed and expansive and tell us some fun stories.
Well, listen, I hope people really take advantage of this. It's not very often we can either logistically or budgetarily attract an artist of his stature. And so I hope this community will take advantage of that.
This is the jazz and symphonic event not to be missed.
Absolutely.
This Friday and Saturday. Again, artsiowa.com for tickets, or you can give a call at
to 1-800-369-TUNE.
Tim Hankwich from Orchestra Iowa. Thanks, and I'll see you this weekend.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait.